Welcome to another edition of Voice of the Diaspora. GCOM, can there be free and fair elections without a clean voters list and biometrics? What must be done to ensure that GCOM presides over transparent elections in 2025? And also, is Guyana a police state? We're talking about the infringing of the rights of activist Melly Mills' family by members of the Guyana Police Force. In studio with me today is Professor Dr. David Hinds, an activist, a talk show host, a scholar, and a politician. We welcome Dr. David Hinds to the program. Dr. David Hinds, welcome to Voice of the Diaspora.
Thank you very much, Norman, and thanks for having me again.
And I want to, say how elated I am to have you here on this program. I know that you have weathered the years and the storms of the political turmoil Guyana's faced since independence to now. You have lived through most of it, and you have been chronicling those events in different ways. You continue to do that, and in the most profound way. You have upped your ante, and you are intellectually presenting to the Guyanese people almost daily on your program what is happening in Guyana in terms of its politics, in terms of its economy, in terms of its social situation. Dr. David Hinds, it's a pleasure to have you here on the program. Let me begin by asking you a very important question, a question that is tingling the minds of Guyanese, especially young Guyanese. And many wonder if there will be an elections, and GCOM is in the state it is in, that many believe there cannot be free and fair elections the way GCOM is at the moment. What sense does it make to go out there to vote and only to be disappointed because those votes and that election will be given to those who do not deserve it? Dr. Hinds, I know you have an in-depth knowledge of what is happening in relation to the politics in Guyana. Let us talk extensively, especially to the young people, about GCOM.
Well, the question of credible elections has been an issue from the time of independence to now. And it's a problem that we have not solved. You see, the winner-take-all system that we inherited from the British means that when we have an election, that whoever wins those elections, they win everything. And the parties that lose, they lose everything. And so there is every incentive to try to win the election, to win at all costs. Parties are motivated by this because, like I said, if you win all the power and the authority that comes with governance. And if you lose all. If you win the election, you not only win the executive, control of the executive branch, you win control of the legislative branch, the parliament. You also have some leverage over the judicial branch. Ultimately, you determine who goes into the judicial branch and who does not. And in control of the executive branch, you win the control to distribute resources. You don't have to consult any other party. You distribute resources in ways that you see fit. As I said, you control parliament, you control the speakership of parliament, etc. So there is every incentive to try to win the elections. And our history is riddled with parties trying to get the advantage of winning elections. The control of GCOM, which is the body in charge of overseeing election, then becomes critical. Because if you control GCOM, you are able to control the outcome of elections. And in the early part of our history, the PNC was tainted with rigging elections. And what that has done is that it has blinded us to the endemic problem. Because if you say the PNC rig elections, full stop, then the problem becomes the PNC and not the electoral machinery. And I think some of us may have made that error in trying to point out fiddling with elections. We have given fiddling with elections a particular political face. And so here we are, almost 60 years after independence, coming face to face with the fact that the electoral machinery itself facilitates electoral malpractice, beginning with GCOM. And we are trying to solve that problem. The Carter Center in 1990 gave us a blueprint, a temporary blueprint, so to speak, in terms of how we constitute GCOM. That is, GCOM has always been a political entity. But in what the Carter Center did was to say, okay, we give both parties equal representation on GCOM, and we have an independent chair. And that was supposed to be a temporary solution. Ultimately, we wanted a professional, non-partisan GCOM, but that has not materialized because neither of the two parties has moved aggressively to dismantling the political control of GCOM. And here we are today, confronting the problem of free and fair elections, the PPP. The PPP today has the advantage at GCOM. And while the PNC and other opposition parties are saying, okay, so time up. It is time now we clean up GCOM. The PPP is standing in the way of cleaning up GCOM. So if we were to go to an election today under the present arrangements, those elections will be far from free and fair. One, we have a voters list that is equal to the population size or even bigger now. The number I heard from Vincent Alexander about a week ago on my program puts our voters list at over 700,000. And that's where our population is. So we're probably the only country in the world where we have a voters list that is as large as your population or even larger than your population. One. Now that voters list opens up all kinds of possibilities for electoral fraud, all kinds of possibilities. We used to theorize about it, but in a real backhand way in 2020. And that is why the 2020 election is so important. We hear narratives of the 2020 election that are not accurate. What the 2020 election did is that it opened up the porousness of the electoral system for all to see. We, in pursuit of its claim that the PNC/coalition had rigged the election, GCOM was convinced to do a recount. From any perusal of the law, GCOM doing a recount was an overreach, in the sense that if you have problems with an election, you go to a petition. That is what our law says. You go to a petition after the election. But the PPP went to court, and the court said that once there's not a declaration and there are problems with the electoral system, GCOM can fix it. And GCOM proceeded to fix it, but in my estimation of a number of people, it overstepped its boundaries. Nevertheless, the Order 60, which led to the recount, revealed some things about our electoral system and about the 2020 election, which points to blatant fraud. And that fraud arose from the fact that the voters list was bloated. That is, that we saw the PPP before election day, utilizing the voters list to engage in impersonation of voters. And according to the numbers that we got from GCOM, the number of votes that the PPP got from impersonation is equivalent to 1 seat. And the PPP won the election according to the declared results by 1 seat.
By 1 seat.
Yeah. And so therefore, if you start with a bloated voters list, then you are starting with a rigged election, because what you are doing there is that you are giving the political parties a blank check to delve into a voters list that has about 200 and something thousand extra names. And all you need to do is to pilfer a 10,000 from that and you get 2 seats. You pilfer a 5,000, you get a seat. And so you can't talk about a credible election if the voters list is that, because you are depending on what you call the fairness of human beings. And human beings, by our very nature, we are fair people, but we are also subjective people. As I said, if you win the election, you win total power. If you lose, you lose all the power. So you may be a good human being who is given to justice, but when it comes to power, and you have a situation before you where if you win this thing, you win everything, then you are going to be drawn by this incentive that if I win this election, I'm winning it from a party, I win it from a race. And so, although I'm a good man, I'm a good God-fearing man, I'm a good God-fearing woman, the incentive to win here is so big that I am going to go against my God-fearingness.
Yeah.
Because in trying to win here, I'm delivering power for my party and for my race. And this is where we are, all right? We cannot deliver a credible election with the voters list at is. The court has said, look, we can't tamper with the people on the voters list because the law is the law. The law says that these people on there are their citizens, and you can't take them off the register, the register. All right, and we draw our voters list from our list of registrants. The court said you can't take the people off. All right, the court has to uphold the law.
Yeah.
Now, the law then has to be changed by Parliament. Parliament can then make a law to allow us to extract before an election a voters list from the list of registrants. The Parliament can pass a law and say to GCOM, look, you can do this.
Are they moving in that direction, Dr.
No,
according to your knowledge?
No,
I'm tying in what you will explain that. But you said earlier that there seemed to have been an unwillingness by the 2 major parties to address this.
Right.
issue.
The PPP doesn't want to do it. The PNC has said that it is willing to do it. Right.
And that is while the PNC is out of power, or when did the PNC say that they were willing to do it? They were in power for 5 years. It wasn't addressed. So Just explain to the young people.
Well. It wasn't addressed, but they attempted to address it at GCOM,
Okay.
with house registration, and then the court said you can't do it. And by
Oh,
the
so the court
time
pronounced
the
on that,
court
yeah.
pronounced, yes, they went to court. I think it was Christopher Ram who went to court, and the court pronounced on it and said, "Look, you can't change this by house registration." By the time the court placed that order, the coalition was essentially out of power.
Out of us. So it's clear that the coalition tried even while they were in office.
Yes,
So I
yes,
just
yes.
want our viewers and our young
Right,
people to hear
right,
that
right.
aspect. And the second aspect you were dealing with.
And so if the court doesn't, then the parliament can do it. But you need both parties to agree to change the legislation, right? And the PPP has not agreed to that. So the legislation cannot be changed. Can GCOM take measures on its own to get around the thing? Yes, I think GCOM can. GCOM can clean up the voters list without violating the law. And the
Also,
PPP, well, they can, first of all, biometrics, right? Biometrics can take care of vote impersonation. That when people go to vote and they are not in Guyana, even though they're on the voters list, biometrics can prevent such a person from voting. And the PPP is not going down that direction. They're not exploring ways and means of preventing fraud from happening. No. After the 2020 election, the opposition appointed commissioners moved the motion to have GCOM do its own independent assessment of the election. That is, GCOM conducting an election in 2020. There have been questions about these elections.
Sorry, Dr. Hinds, you're coming off the screen a bit. Just come a bit more to this side. Not that side, the other. Yeah, perfect, right there. Sorry about that. Go ahead, Dr. Hinds.
Right.
Yeah,
the commissioners asked that GCOM do an assessment of what went right and what went wrong with the election. And a GCOM done that assessment to determine what went right and what went wrong. It would have been in a position to correct some of the wrongs and to minimize the chances of fraudulent elections. They have not done so. So we are going into another election without an assessment of what went right and what went wrong in the previous election by GCOM itself.
So let me get this clear. You're saying, do you believe that the PPP and GCOM are deliberately in collusion to ensure that
the PPP is in GCOM. The PPP has 3 commissioners.
The PNC has 3 commissioners too.
Right. So it's the PPP 3 plus the chairperson.
But the chairperson has the deciding vote, I understand.
Yes, and the chairperson has been voting with the PPP on these matters.
Oh, the chairperson has been voting with the PPP. Yes. I'm glad you made that very clear for our viewers. So many people are tuning in. Go ahead, Dr. Hinds.
Yes, and so therefore GCOM itself has shown an unwillingness to address the issues. The government is concerned not with cleaning up the voters list and cleaning up the machinery. The government is more concerned about passing laws to punish people who engage in what they call fraud. Now, if you're working at GCOM, there is what is called deliberate fraud, and there are people who engage in deliberate fraud. But there are also people who make genuine mistakes. They're human beings. You make mistake with tallying up some votes at a particular voting station. And the laws that they've passed will punish anyone who knowingly or unknowingly engage in quote unquote fraud. So the government itself is not interested in ensuring a clean electoral machinery. They're more interested in punishing people that they think is going to engage in fraud against them. Now, what do you do what happens when you do that? Is that there's a disincentive for people to want to work for GCOM. So opposition, people who are partial to the opposition, for example, or let me be blunt about it, African Guyanese, are going to be less likely to apply to work at GCOM because they will think
Because of
that
fear.
of fear. And that then allows the government to populate the machinery with people who are partial to them. So they're not interested in cleaning up the machinery. GCOM, the majority of GCOM, that is 3+1, they're not interested in cleaning up the machinery. And so here we are.
Dr. Hinds, you are actually penetrating my entire being, and there's a rising anger because you are simplifying this thing, but you're making it clear and it is profound. The young people must hear what is happening. This program tries to be very balanced, and if the PNC goes wrong, this program calls out the PNC. But what I'm hearing here today, that the future of Guyana is being interfered with deliberately. Free and fair elections, democracy in Guyana, which will secure its future to the benefit of all Guyanese, is being deliberately interfered by the PPP civic government and by GCOM. Would you agree?
Yes, and you're correct. And look, people may say, well, what is this big deal about getting elections right? Elections are never free and fair anywhere in the world. There are always inconsistencies and so on. And that is true. But election is the only means we have in Guyana to remove governments.
Yeah.
We are not in the era of revolution. The era of revolution is gone, right? The present world system does not allow for removal of governments other than through elections.
Yes.
Even if you were to, let's say people were to go on the streets in Guyana, and a lot of us believe that we should have some street demonstrations against what's happening in the country. But even if you were to go on the streets in Guyana and you were to force the government to come to the table, ultimately it will be negotiations that will bring about change. These are not the days where you go on the streets or you go in the hills, you fight, you bring down a government, and you replace the government with the leaders of the demonstrators. No, we can have demonstrations, and we should have demonstrations, in my view. But the demonstration itself will not bring the government down. You see? And so because the world system now only allows for change in government
through the electoral process.
That is why we need to get the electoral process right.
But it looks like that demonstrations and massive street protests is the only thing that would actually cause them to want to get it right in GCOM and get a clean list and so on or whatever. Because here we're looking at a situation. That's what I'm going to come to the question, but I want you to complete what you're saying. I really want you to elaborate.
No, I got your
situation where you have taught here, and you are a professor, and you have a knowledge of Guyana's politics, Caribbean politics. I think you specialized in that. And you are saying that the government and GCOM, they're unwilling to clean this thing up and to make it right. You're also saying that in the world today, the only way allowed to remove governments now is through the electoral process. through that democratic process. In Guyana, we have a situation where the democratic process is being undermined by the ruling government and GCOM, which is the body that deals with election. It's supposed to be a body that is impartial. It's an independent body. As I understand it, maybe I am wrong. What my question to you, after you would have continued your extrapolation on this matter, my question to you is, how then will we, the people, the young people, and Guyanese in general, ensure that there is free and fair election in which their votes are respected and the outcome is to their benefit by virtue of their collective votes?
When a government refuses to bring about change within the law, within the context of the law, within the context of the institutions, then people have no other alternative than to step outside of the formal institutions to bring about that change. We are at that point. The government has blatantly refused to do anything about this matter. And therefore, the people of the country are constitutionally in their right, it is a constitutional right to then step outside of the formal system to have redress. And this is where a movement for free and fair election is overdue.
Needed. Yeah, it's
overdue. And if I can go back a little bit in history, when we were at an impasse after the Cold War ended, and there were demands on the PNC to hold free and fair elections, demands on the PNC for a clean voters list, demands on the PNC for a GCOM that is fair. These issues that we are confronting today are not new. We confronted them at the end of the 1980s, going into the 1990s. And the then opposition was able to bring the governing party to the table and to get a solution by mounting a movement. And that movement included public demonstrations, picketing, marches, etc. It also included lobbying international forces. And it was the combination of mass protests and lobbying international forces that brought the then ruling party to the table, and we were able to improve the machinery. In fact, elections were postponed for 2 years so that we can fix the machinery,
right,
and that we can go into the election. Elections were due in 1990. We went in 1992, but we were able to go in with a much improved electoral machine. We were at that place today. And I think that we have to have an all-party movement. All opposition parties have to come together and to hold one head on this issue. And in effect say that, look, we are committed to elections as a means of changing government. And so therefore the electoral machinery has to be crystal clear. It has to be fair. It has to be just. And so therefore mount a movement to get Guyanese people to put their energies in a public way behind changing the electoral machinery. Simultaneously, given the geopolitics, given our oil, given the neighborhood that we belong to, we have to engage the global stakeholders, in particular the United States, the European Union, and CARICOM, which all played a major role in changing the government in 2020, despite their recognition that the machinery was not fair. CARICOM in its report said that the machinery that GCOM has, it cannot deliver free and fair election. It nevertheless went ahead and said the 2020
election was won by the PPP.
Contradiction, right? But the key point here is that CARICOM, the European Union, and the Americans have all said that the electoral machinery cannot deliver free and fair elections.
But it is for us. It is for us, Dr. Hinds, outside of the international community. It's for us, the people, to bell that cat and to begin that agitating to ensure that it is corrected.
Yes, but I'm saying
because our destiny relies on that.
Yeah, but we have to be realistic. We have to be realistic, Norman. Nothing gets done in Guyana of consequences, of any major consequence by Guyanese alone. We are at that point. We are. You don't have close to 30 billion barrels of oil. I mean, they're saying now it's about 18 billion, but our research has shown that we have close to 30 billion barrels of oil. You don't have 30 billion barrels of oil in 2024, and the control of your country is left to you alone. The big countries will never do that. Let's be clear about that, right? Okay. That foreign forces are always going to play an important role. They've always intervened in our politics, and they have more of an incentive to do so. During the Cold War, they intervened to prevent us from going communist, right? Today, the Cold War is over. They're intervening to ensure that control of that oil resource is not in the hands of people who they do not like or they do not sanction. So let us get that very clear.
But there's a difference now, Dr. Hinds, not to cut you, but there's a difference now. During the Cold War era, the world was not as it is today. The world did not have the liberation of voices via social media. People's possibilities have expanded to the point in which freedom of speech and expression, you understand, can create a revolution without street protests.
Your point is well taken, and I'm not talking here about only street protests. Note I said what we need is a movement.
Yes, sir.
And the movement is more than street protests, right? And I can tell you, when we got electoral change, the change in the electoral machinery at the end of the 1980s, and it was through a movement that included street demonstrations, right? And that's what I'm saying, equally in terms of mobilizing Guyanese to decide that we are going to confront this issue as Guyanese. In addition to that, we have to also sensitize the global people to the importance of this. And they have already said that this is a problem. They all of them in 2020 said that the GCOM machinery cannot deliver credible elections. So they know that.
So there's that understanding already.
Well, I'm getting to your point. Your point
is
that ultimately it is we Guyanese who have to build the cat. So we can't expect the external forces to come in and say, look, there's going to be, we want a clean voters list, we want biometrics. We have to demand it.
We have to demand
and then go to them and ask for their support on it. And I think that is the only way for us to get some change before the next election.
But I see very small protest action happening in significant. I don't want to say insignificant, significant, but not that impactful. You know, we see a few people going out there, and I am not sure it is anyone from the major opposition party or the opposition party. Sorry, you know, not from the AFC. A few people from the PNC, I understand, will go there, but there are other independent persons who are going out there consistently. I've had a woman on my show, and she is an activist, and she is a part of the small protests. And, you know, she was very, very animated in expressing our frustration at what is happening. Why is it, Dr. Hinds, at this juncture, 1 year before national elections, why is it that we are not hearing from the major parties about the urgency of dealing with this issue?
I cannot speak for the other major parties. I can only speak for my party, right? My party, our party, the Working People's Alliance, is committed to a clean voters list, biometrics, and other reforms that we come to ensure a clean voters list. We are committed to that. We are committed to elections, but we are committed to free and fair elections. Now, the dilemma, one of the dilemmas that we have in Guyana is that there's a third way of forcing change. And that third way of forcing change is to boycott the election. No, the problem in Guyana with boycotting an election is that you have to have the capacity to stop the election. Because if you boycott the election and the one party goes ahead, it wins everything. It means that you're going to get 65, the PPP will get 65 seats in the National Assembly. And there are things that you have to change with a 2/3 majority. The PPP can basically upturn the whole constitutional architecture of the country if they were to get 6. So we are in that bind. Now, let me take you to Dominica. At the last election, the opposition in Dominica boycotted the election. And the government went ahead and they held elections. And the major party in Dominica is not in parliament. But Dominica is a homogeneous society. All them are African.
They don't have the racial cleavages and all of that.
They don't have the racial cleavage. You see, if we boycott an election, it will be basically Africans who will be boycotting the election. And then the Indian party is going to win everything. And when you look at the way this party, the Indian party, has operated in power with a 1-seat majority, can you imagine when they have 65 seats?
65 seats, yeah.
So that option of boycott, I'm not saying it should not be considered, but I'm saying that is third down the line. The first option is to mount an internal domestic movement for free and fair elections. The second line of march, or simultaneously with that first line of march, is to engage the international community to get them to use their leverage to help the movement. And then a last resort is boycotting the election. And as I said, there are some problems with that last resort.
Well, there will be problems with that if you allow the PPP to have, carte blanche control of the country. But here again, it comes back to a revolution as we know it, a revolution as Hoyt would have led, that said, in Guyana, we will take care of our affairs and we will make this nation ungovernable if there is an imbalance in the distribution of wealth. Now, we can intellectually speak about all these things, but every day we see a government that is trampling on the rights of the people. We see a government that is controlling the economy and shutting a particular ethnic group out of that. We see a government that is using a police force to persecute not only the ordinary Guyanese, but Guyanese of African descent who are of caliber and social standing and contributors to the development of Guyana. Now, the young people who are the majority in Guyana, they are looking for guidance. They are looking to hear how can they be a part of a process in this modern world that they can enjoy the equitable wealth, they can enjoy the wealth equitably in their country. They see today what is happening, and they are being forced by the silence and the inaction, Dr. Hinds, of those who they consider their leaders, to the point where they are so uncertain that to survive and to get things, you find them leaning towards the PPP, a party that is trampling and undermining others and themselves. Now, this is where we are at. I want to understand, and I really want you to speak to the young people today. And you have really made it very explicit and very clear what we have unfolding before us. What we have unfolding before us. I think everyone listening, and there's a lot of people tuning in, they understand what you're saying. A movement is needed for electoral reform and all of that. We understand that. But what happens, Dr. Hinds, if the politicians don't get up tomorrow, if the opposition politicians don't get up tomorrow, come together and say, these are the strategies that we must embrace. This is the urgency that we are going to deal with because the elections are next year. Can we expect that?
Well, I mean, we have to be critical of the opposition parties for not up to now realizing the importance of this subject and to mount an all-party movement to deal with the subject. I, on behalf of the WPA, have been calling for this joint opposition party movement from way back in 2020. And I was guided by our history that we only got big results when multiple parties come together and speak with one voice. I mentioned what happened after the end of the Cold War in around the 1992 election. Coming up to the 2011 election, there was the joint opposition parties that included the PNC, WPA, AFC, and part of the joint opposition party then became the APNU, eventually became the APNU AFC. And so our history has shown us that whenever we want big change, the opposition political parties need to come together and to advocate and mount a movement. This has not happened. Each political party stays in its own lane, and so therefore we don't have an all-party movement.
Are you making that clear call now? Are you making that clear call?
I have been making that clear call for the last 5 years on behalf of the WPA. I've said it publicly. I've said it privately to Mr. Norton. I've said that we are in an unusual moment. We are confronting a dictatorship.
What was the response?
We are confronting a situation where there's a stranglehold on the electoral machinery, and we don't have an all-party movement. That is unprecedented in Guyana. It is unprecedented in Guyana, and for that matter, anywhere else. And I took to Mr. Norton's credit, when he first came to office, we were able to have the opposition parties meet. And remember, we had a public meeting at Burnham's Court, and then we had a second one at Golden Grove. But then we didn't continue with that movement. So,
well, not deviating. I understand that the latest news from sources, speaking to Voice of the Diaspora, that the latest news was quite surprising to me because of your support to Mr. Norton at times when I didn't agree. Support for Mr. Norton at times when I didn't agree. That the PNC and Mr. Norton, they are now saying that they will not coalesce with the WPA. Is that true?
No, I don't know about that. I have not been apprised of that. The PNC has not communicated that to us, so I do not know of that. I don't know how true that is. But going back to the point of a joint opposition movement, We have been calling for joint opposition movement, and we continue to believe that the joint opposition movement is needed if we are going to get GCOM to be democratized. Maybe, I don't know, maybe the other political parties are in touch with international forces, and that those international forces may be able on their own to push the PPP to agree to these things. That is a possibility.
But that's maybe. There's uncertainty.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I don't
think
know.
our young people need to know from the opposition
Well,
parties.
I'm coming to the young people's story.
Go ahead.
I'm coming to the young people's story, because I am not a big fan of the young people argument. Norman, at 14 years old, I became a political activist. I was a village activist before that, starting when I was 12. 11, 12. I became a village political activist. And then at 14 years old, I heard Walter Rodney. And I ran home and I said to my auntie, I heard this man and I like what this man is saying and I want to join the thing. And my auntie said, you can join the thing so long as teacher Sydney is part of it, Kwayana, right? Yeah. And I became a political activist, a national political activist at 14 years old. I do not understand this thing about young people. Young people want to make change, go into these organizations and make changes. I'm not saying going into the organizations automatically will bring about change.
But you were inspired by Rodney and Kwayana. It's unfair to say that there is no inspiration for the young people now.
But that is absolutely untrue. There are people like myself who are out there. You can't say, David Hinds and it's like the PNC, he don't want protests and so on and things. There are people like myself who out there, come and join us. So I'm saying young people have critical decisions to make. I joined Rodney and Kwayana. I didn't agree with the PNC. So I didn't join the PNC. I joined what was then maybe have seen as an unpopular, movement, an opposition movement. Yeah. They want to cause revolution in the country and so on. I joined that. And I'm saying young people have options. There are three major parties in the opposition: AFC, WPA, and the PNC. If you don't like the PNC, come into the WPA and strengthen it. Go into the AFC and strengthen it. So I think this thing about young people, this and thing, I don't buy it. I don't buy it.
But Dr. Hinds, I beg to differ there quickly. I beg to differ there. Yeah, go ahead.
Let me finish before you differ with me. Right? I don't buy it. No. I have been talking to young people in recent times. I spent 4 months in Guyana recently, and I deliberately spent a lot of time talking to young people. And young people are tuned in.
Yeah,
a lot of us think that young people are not tuned in. When I went into the villages, mostly on the East Coast, Georgetown, and so on, the people who are calling out to me and to say, I watch you on Politics 101 are young people, right? I went to a couple of the big parties that young people have, and went there, and young people call me over, especially young men, to talk to me about politics. So I'm saying, I agree that our young people are tuned in. That's one. However, our young people are not part of a political culture that encourages joining an organization, right? I came up in an era when young people, we were encouraged, the political culture encouraged you to join organizations. Our young people are not joiners, all right? And so the challenge for us is how, in the context of our young people not joining organizations, how do we get to them to mobilize them? And I think as political parties, we have to think that through, right? Yes. By the same token, I still believe that those young people who are disposed to join in should join. If you don't want to join a political party, you come to Dr. Hinds and say, Dr. Hinds, I'm too into this political party, but I want to be part of this movement. Can we form an organization that is not necessarily partisan, but is political? All right? So we can explore ways. We can explore ways of getting young people into the fore, right? But it has to be a two-way thing. It
Yeah,
has to be leadership, and
but
it has to be
but
initiative.
Dr. Hines, that's the point, and I really want to touch on this point because you're and you are a scholar, and I couldn't really, in layman's term, test you in any sort of intellectual argument or anything.
That's not true.
No, I'm telling you that. But I'll say this to you. I think that you're doing a disservice to the young people at the moment because they live in a world and a society that is now so open that they are caught up in a stranglehold in terms of which direction they must go. And I'll tell you why. In 1968, Lyndon Forbes Samson, I'm addressing a national youth conference, said these words. He said the social, economic, and political problems of young people are not peculiarly theirs, but problems of the society in which they find themselves. He went on to say that we live in an adult-dominated world where hypocritical posturing and pious protestations, you understand, envelope the society. And we are seeing that today. While you would have felt a Rodney and felt a Kwayana, there isn't a Rodney or Kwayana today in our political parties. Our young people are crying out for leadership. And not, hold on, not a leadership, Dr. Hinds, of words.
No.
Hold on. Not a leadership. Hear what the young people are saying. They're putting us in jail for weed. They're locking us up. They're killing us. We know it's the PPP doing it because they're racist. We know that. We are ready to stand up. But we are looking to our leadership because the culture of Guyana's politics and its society is a culture of young people conforming in every facet of society. You have to look up to your boss. You have to say, good morning, Mr. Thompson, because of seniority, because of age, because of position. You have to toe the line to even move forward. And I'm saying this to you because today, regardless of what is happening, I agree with a lot of what you're saying. The young people are at a juncture in Guyana in which they need guidance, they need leadership, and they need direction. I want to say this on their behalf. There is none. There isn't a Rodney. There isn't a Quiley. You, Dr. Hinds, is brought on this program because you have that potential. Bring 10,000 on the street on behalf of the WPA. Bring 10,000.
I don't think you listen to me fully.
No, I heard you. But you know this program. You go ahead, though. But go ahead. You can rebut.
I said that we are not providing at the level of the political party. We are not providing the leadership to the young people to attract them.
Good.
But I also said one of the problems we have is that in the current era, young people are not joiners. Back in my time and even your time, as young people, we found ourselves in the YSM. The Indian young people went into the PYO, we went into ASCRA, we went into the WPA, and so on. The culture has changed, and our people are no longer joiners. Young people are not walking off the street and going and join things. That's a reality we have to confront. And so, therefore, the challenge for young people is how, in the context of not being joiners,
Agreed.
Right? How do you become part of the process when you're not disposed to join in? And then the challenge for us as a political party people is how we entice those young people to join the movement, knowing that they're not joining us, they're not going to come into political parties. So I'm saying we are at a critical juncture in our country, right? It's about the new political culture. Young people are not joiners, and political party leaders are not the inspirers that of yesteryear.
Yes.
And so, given that reality,
Agree with
how
you.
do we think this thing through and to get young people into the movement? And I'm saying that there are other ways of coming into the movement other than joining political parties.
Well, the PVP bringing Vibes Cartel. The PVP bringing Vibes Cartel, and they bring in all the big artists, and they keep in the biggest parties, and so on. And young people are following.
Well,
They're giving young people, impressionable young people, bands to do things in the diaspora, and the young people are identifying with them. We are seeing what is happening, Doctor.
My brother, the PPP is turning young people, especially black young people, into hustlers. I am not into that.
Thank you.
I am not. I'm not into that.
Thank you. How do we change that? How do we confront that? How do we save our young people?
I'm saying that we are at a difficult period in our history. The PPP is able to do that because it has money and it has the power of the state. And when you have money and power of the state, you can get people to do things that they would not normally do.
That when you have strong leadership, money is power, but belief is more power.
Hold on. Power is defined as the ability to get people to do things that they would not normally do. And if you have people who are poor, people who are looking to get up in life, young people, and you wave to them money, not just money, but behind that money, the power of the state, you are going to get young people to gravitate. Now, but what you are doing is that you're creating a nation of hustlers.
Hustlers, yes.
And I am not into that. I carry music into my village. I carry Yoruba singers. I carry thing into, but the music is a political weapon of struggle.
Yes.
Not to entice. Look,
not to entice. The
important thing here is power, my brother. Right? If you have political power, economic power, you are able to get citizens to do things that they would not normally do. And so, therefore, urgently, we have to think in the opposition of being at the table. If you're not at the table, you are not going to influence anything, including your own young people. Because your own young people are saying, me got to eat the bread, me got to eat the food.
Eat the food, yes.
Okay? How are you going to be able to get them to eat the bread or food if you're not sitting at the table, either as the government on your own or as a power-sharing government? And so I think we are putting our energies and hitting our heads against a wall, trying to deal with a problem that we are not going to be able to deal with in opposition. The culture of the society is one in which our young people are looking for economic opportunities.
Rightfully
and so therefore, some of them do not distinguish between economic opportunities and people who are trying to treat you as slaves. All right? And I don't blame the young people for that. I am saying we are not going to be able to correct that out of power. It's all, when you have power, that's when you're able to make big changes. And I have said one of my big criticisms of the coalition government is that it did not recognize that after 23 years of your people, that's 2 generations of young people, or of your people, not knowing what it is to see their supporters at the seat of power. After living in that state for 23 years, and you got power, and you didn't recognize that you had to use that power to correct that malaise for 3 generations of young black people.
They didn't have enough time, though, Dr.
Their image of power is an Indian man with plenty money. You have to recognize all that influences people's minds. Their image of power is an Indian man with plenty money. And when you got power in your hand to change that vision of power in the society, we did not, because we didn't want to deal with race, We didn't want to deal with sociology. We didn't want to deal with things that was not business as usual. And we didn't recognize that.
But they give the Indian man more contracts, and they give the Indian media houses more money than Africa. So the politicians themselves are guilty of what you say.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I'm saying the coalition governed as business as usual.
Yes.
Without recognizing the underlying sociological and cultural issues in the society. They did not take into consideration that 2 generations of their supporters, in their head, power does not have an African face. It had a male Indian face, economic power and political power. And that you now are their representatives, that you are to change that notion. And what I'm saying here is that you have to go beyond the politics as usual. And our coalition leaders, unfortunately, did not recognize that. And so, therefore, we can't correct the problems of our young people while we are in opposition, competing against a government that is prepared to use the power of the state, the power of the purse, to turn our young people into hustlers. We can only talk to them, give them a certain kind of consciousness and hope that they act, because we don't have the power to steer them in another direction. And we have to be factual about that. And we have to be very clear about that and don't beat up on ourselves. Because young people are not behaving in a certain way.
Dr. Hinds here, Dr. David Hinds here, professor, a scholar, politician, and also an activist who has a talk show almost every evening, 5 days a week, I understand. And Dr. Hinds, Politics 101, you can see that every evening. He will tell you before we wrap up what time and so on, and invite you to listen to his interviews. It is very informative. It's very knowledgeable. It is perfect for understanding what is really happening in Guyana in a way in which is not partisan. Dr. Hinds speaks on behalf of the people and the country. Look, Dr. Hinds, we will go for a short break where you can have some water, whatever, and we will come back to discuss in closing one of our activists, a Black woman, who has been exposing the police force, who has been exposing the government. Yesterday, her family, the police would have invaded their home without a warrant. Her mom, her 78-year-old grandmom, and her young son were traumatized by police with weapons ransacking that home and intimidating that family through victimization because of that activist work to expose wrongs in our society. That activist name is Melissa Atwell, popularly known as Melly Mel. And the Guyanese people are now standing in solidarity with her. I want to talk to you a bit about that. Are we becoming a police state? But when we return, we will discuss that. We will take a short break.
me alive. I've been licked, washed up for years, and I merely survive because of my pride. And this loneliness won't leave me alone. It's such a drag to be on my own. My woman left me, but she didn't tell me why. Well, I guess I've got to cry. I've got to many rivers to cross, but just where to begin? I'm plaguing for time. There've been times I find myself thinking of committing.
Welcome back, viewers, here on Voice of the Diaspora. Special guest Dr. David Hinds here with us. And of course, we spoke about the importance of having, Dr. Hinds spoke about the importance of having a movement to deal with GCOM and the electoral issues that must be corrected if there are to be free and fair elections. I think that is a pivotal point. He also spoke of a unity among the various political parties in Guyana, that there has to be that unity. He talked about young people and what is happening in Guyana and what should be done to ensure that, they become joiners of movements. Dr. David Hinds here on Voice of for Diaspora. This is a very rare interview. Dr. Hinds, yesterday, Guyanese people were stung. They were really surprised and really upset in layman's term at the police, the Guyana police force, apparently on orders from those higher above, the PPP government. I like to say that on this program. I'm not afraid of them. Orders from Anil Nandalal, orders from Barajatio, orders from Irfan Ali, and others in the government of Guyana to victimize the family of political activists, rights activists, women's rights activists, Melissa Atwell, popularly known as Melly Mel. And the police claim for entering that home forcefully and traumatizing a 78-year-old Black woman who's the grandmother of Melly Mel, her mother, and her young son. Excuse was that they found some weed outside on the road somewhere in an alleyway. And they got information that Melly Mel's mother was doing drugs. They found some weed. They put that in the newspaper. They found it in the alleyway outside, nowhere on the property or the premises. Dr. Hinds, are we returning to a police state? Are we a police state? What is happening? What are your views in relation to what transpired yesterday to the family of Melissa Atwell by the Guyana Police Force? Guns barging into a home of primarily two women and a young boy, young Black boy.
Let me first of all express solidarity with Miss Atwell. And she needs our solidarity. And I want to express my own solidarity and solidarity of our political party, the Working People's Alliance, with Ms. Atwell. And then go on to say, in answer to your question, whether we are becoming a police state. We are a police state. We are a police state. We've always been a police state. The police force was created in 1839, 1 year after slavery was formally abolished. And the police force was created as a mechanism to control the formerly enslaved people. And even after independence, when, of course, there was an opportunity to rethink the role and the function of the police force. There were reforms of the police force, but there wasn't a revolutionary transformation of the police force from a political tool of colonialism to something different. The police force has remained a political tool of post-colonial governments. And the PPP, it becomes even more problematic because the PPP, over the decades of independence, have socialized their supporters to see the police force as their enemy, primarily on the ground that the police force was peopled, is peopled by mostly African people. And so therefore they saw the police force as an ethnic enemy, as a political enemy, and they socialize half the population to believe that, right? So when the PPP comes into power, it treats the police force in a particular way. And over time, what it has done is that it has transformed the police force into a political tool of the ruling party, where the police force targets its fire at African people. And that's a reality that we have to confront. They tried to get Indian people to go into the police force. They didn't go for sociological and other reasons. So the next step was to then control the leadership of the police force. And that is what the PPP has done, has turned the police force into a political tool. So we've always been a police state. It is more pronounced under the PPP because the PPP has to treat the police leadership in a certain kind of way for its own survival. And so when we look at what's happened yesterday to Ms. Atwell's family, it's a continuation. 2 women being harassed by the police. We saw that at Moko, where primarily women were beaten, knelt down upon by the police. We saw it at Hillfoot. We saw it in Mackenzie. We saw it with the vendors in front of the hospital at the seawall. We saw it with a young Black woman who was spat upon by an Indian man. What has happened there with Miss Atwell and the others is part of the larger operation of this government. No, there is something about our society, including our own Black people and our own, well, not Black people, our opposition politicians. Our opposition politicians are afraid to call a spade a spade. They're afraid to say the PPP, as part of its agenda of domination, is on the rampage to physically, politically, economically, and culturally put Black people in their place. That is before our eyes. We have all kinds of other descriptions for the government. Autocracy and all of that. As Henry Jeffrey said on my program last, and I agree with him, the problem with the PPP is not that it's an autocracy. It's that it's an ethnic autocracy, a racial autocracy, an Indian Guyanese-led autocracy. Our politicians are afraid to say that. And because we're afraid to call the PPP for what they are, Coffee 250, of which I'm a part, called them, said, we are in the face of an apartheid, an emerging apartheid state. Some of the political parties shy away from that characterization. I'm saying, in the absence of characterizing the PPP for what it is, it's an ethnic autocracy. It is a government that is prepared to use the state to crush another ethnic group. And so long as we allow the PPP to get away with that, then they are doing their stuff, not being afraid of being called out for what it is. All right? Well, you know, they're going after Mary Mel's family because Mary Mel exposes the government. All right, fair enough. I know some Indians who expose the government, but they're not sending police with long guns to terrorize the mother and the grandmother. And we have to be clinical. I'm stressing this because Black people sometimes get out of whack. You know, Melly Mel is being targeted because she exposes the government, but because she exposes the government as a Black woman. And they have no compunctions about sending police. I'm sure some of them, well, it was led by an Indian man, the police that led the squad, but I'm sure there were Black men there. They had no compunctions of sending the police against a 56 and 80-something-year-old parent and grandparents. No compunctions. They would not do that to an Indian family, even an Indian family who opposed them. And I think we have to get our story right. And we have to get out of this fear of saying to ourselves and to the world what exactly we're experiencing in Guyana. And what we're experiencing is the worst form of racial discrimination, racial oppression at every twist and turn. And the PPP will put in its thing, well, we were acting on a tip. We were acting on intelligence. Colorblind. When in fact, they are being driven by the need to put Black people in their place. Who is this little Black girl who's getting secrets about our government and putting it up in the media? Who is she? Well, we're going to show she who has power. And that is exactly what they have done. And we Black people have to get wise and recognize that as a race, we are under threat. I fear for my race. I fear for many things in Guyana. But primarily, I fear for Black people in Guyana. And I think that is the story here. But even Melly Mel's supporters are refusing to say that that is the story. They are not going to send policemen with guns to terrorize any 80-something-year-old Indian woman. They're not going to do that. Even if that Indian woman's daughter is opposed to them. And that is what we have to say. And I go back to our young people. And I want to use your term of this. We are doing a disservice to our young people. Because we are not telling our young people that what is happening to you is happening to you because you're Black. We are telling them all these stories. You know, well, Indian people are oppressed too. And Amerindian people are oppressed. There is no Indian Quindon Bacchus. There is no Indian or in Boston.
Henry Boys.
And we are not mobilizing our young people on what we should be mobilizing them on. And when David Hinds goes out there and tells them, you're being pilloried because you are Black. No, David, man, Indian people suffering too, and so on. From our own leaders. And I'm saying the mixed signal that we are giving to Black youngsters are partly responsible for the Black young people not joining us. And when the PPP come by with a little thing, they go for it because we are shielding our young people from Black consciousness. I think the more Black conscious our young people become, the more they're going to be able to stand up and say to the PPP, "Guanso, with your little trinklets." The more they're going to be able to recognize us as legitimate spokespersons for them and wanting to join us. The question is, we continue to dance around the issue of race and the racial agenda of this government.
Dr. David Hinds here on Voice of the Diaspora. Very, very powerful and touching words. Succinct, but powerful and touching. Dr. Hinds, you have said a lot, and I'm happy that you have been on this program today. And this program will be widely circulated in parts, in snippets, in brief clips, as I call them, so that our young people can hear from you, Dr. David Hinds of the WPA, an activist, a fighter, a freedom fighter, and a Black activist that is unafraid to speak up on behalf of African Guyanese and of Guyanese in general. Dr. David Hinds, your closing remarks.
I just want to say that this recent thing with Melly Mel, Ms. Atwell, I think should wake up some of our people who are still asleep as to the true nature of this government. Some people say that, we are talking too much and we're not into action. But talk is action. Melly Mel has been talking, but our talk has driven a government to use the power of state against her through our mother and our grandmother. We have to recognize sometimes that you measure the effectiveness of your advocacy, not just by how people respond to you, but how the government responds to your advocacy. There must be something that Melly Mel is doing that is driving the fear into the government. And the government is using the power of the state to combat that fear that is being driven into them. But the fear is being driven into them. I hope our people, especially our young people, because Melly Mel is a young woman, our young people see what this government is doing and allow themselves to develop a consciousness in which they do not directly or indirectly aid and abet this government. There must be some way in which the government gives you $40,000 as what they call part-time workers, and then come to you and tell you got to go to a PYO conference. There must be a way in which you tell them, go to hell, carry your ass that way. I'm not going. Our foreparents were in slavery, where they were property, had no rights. And they stood up. When they tell them walk, they malinger. That's where the term malingering comes from. They tell them walk, they play like if they're walking. And they were under the heels of the most inhumane system. They tell them work for 14 days a week, they malinger for 14 hours per day, they malinger for 6 hours. They destroy crops on the plantation. They planned rebellions. And you cannot tell me that somebody gives you $40,000 and they come and tell you got to put on a red shirt and go and make yourself a jackass at a PYO con, and you go and say, well, I had to go because they forced me to go. Your foreparents were in slavery, forced labor, and they didn't go. Why the hell are you going? But even as I say that, ultimately the responsibility lies with people like myself. Because it is people like myself, the so-called leaders, who have to give these people the consciousness and the confidence to tell Jagdi and them, go to hell. Because you give me $40,000, you dressing me up like in a shirt like a masquerade man, masquerade woman, and go and masquerade in me, parading me as some non-person. I'm saying that we, the leaders, have to give our people that consciousness and that confidence to do what I am asking them to do. And I'm afraid that we cannot depend on especially our political leaders to do that. They are even more fearful than the people that they are leading. And so if the political leaders are fearful to say, I am black, I am proud, and I'm beautiful, if the leaders are fearful of saying that because they're going to lose some crossover votes, why the hell do you believe that the ordinary citizens would not be fearful to say that? If our leaders say, I am black, I'm proud, I am beautiful, and I do not deserve to be treated in this way, if the leaders can say that, then more of our people, our young people will say. To expect our young people to say it, and our leaders are not saying it, then is that we are burying our heads in this.
Dr. Hinds, saying to the young people here today on this program, say to the young people whether you are going to formally write to the opposition parties to call for that unity to deal with the electoral process.
Well, I have been calling for that every day.
Formalizing it.
This morning I was on Kedaki's program and the opposition leader called in. And I reiterated my call then, and I'm going to do so here. We are going to move forward in a positive way with unity. Our people want to see us together. That picture out of Buxton with Nigel Hughes, Aubrey Norton, and myself on the stage went viral. And it gave our people some hope. And people this morning were asking, after then, Dr. Hinds, what? And I think I understand what the political parties are doing. The AFC is off on its own, building up its stocks. The PNC is building up its stocks. The WP is forced to do the same thing. And that is party thinking. But while we are thinking party, our people are psychologically being bruised. They feel better when they see us together. And we have to find a way to strategize as parties without endangering the well-being of our people. Our people depend on our unity for sustenance. It's hell living under a regime like the one we are living under as Black people. And we look for sustenance and hope from anywhere that it comes from our people. And when they see our major leaders together, they're hopeful. Sometimes I go places.
Yeah.
I don't see Nigel very much, but I go places where Norton is. I go to funerals or go to some event. And when people see Norton and myself standing, maybe just chatting thing, you can see the twinkle in their eyes. As a political observer, I look for those things. You can see the twinkle in their eyes. You can see them. You can feel it, right? Because it gives them sustenance. You hear things like them, two strong Black brothers, and you listen to the expression. And I think our political leaders have to recognize that. So I'm calling on my brother political leaders to strategize as your party. I can't tell you not to strategize as your party, but be careful that you don't over-strategize as party and under-strategize.
But for the sake of the records, will you be writing them formally as a political leader in Guyana to say, let us?
No, I don't have to write them formally. I say it every day on my program. And I know they listen. And whenever I see them, I tell them privately. I tell them that privately. They're aware. And I will continue. That is my role. I will continue to hammer that. But those who are in the hearing of my voice, they have to take it up and put pressure on those leaders.
Dr. David Hinds, thank you so much for being here on Voice of the Diaspora. And this has been inspirational. It has been powerful. I cannot thank you enough, and continue the struggle, continue the good fight, continue the sojourn for change in Guyana. Thank you once again for being here on Voice of the Diaspora.
And thank you for
Dr.
having me.
Dr. David Hinds there with us.